Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I mentioned at the end of the previous podcast that I would explain why our Prime Minister was so reluctant to call a Royal Commission into the Bondi terror attack, and how this same mentality stifles any proper debate about national security issues such as ANZUS, AUKUS and our relationship with the United States. However, it involves a bit of moralising from me, so I'll leave it to the end so people can switch off if they aren't interested in listening to that. But before coming to the situation regarding Greenland, something that I don't think is receiving enough attention here, I'll mention that unfortunately I was right about Doanld Trump and the Nobel Peace Prize, and what an utterly revolting, disgusting spectacle that was. The Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Machado, pressured into giving her Nobel medal, a gold medal, to Donald Trump. Now, this sort of behaviour from the US president is that of a 5-year-old, and people just have to stop pandering to him. Don't go out of your way to antagonise him, but stop this pathetic bootlicking. In exchange, Mrs. Machado received nothing more than a gift bag undoubtedly filled with MAGA junk, like presumably a gold-coloured coffee mug and a cap reading Trump 2028. I'll remind everyone interested in these things there has been no regime change in Venezuela. All that has happened is that the previous president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife have been removed by kidnapping, and the repressive military rulers are still in place. As I speculated last time, Trump removed Maduro because he didn't like the way he danced, and because the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, is more compliant on the matter of getting access to oil. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to eventually find out that this was an inside job, with Rodriguez working with the US so that she could get the presidency. The US has already seized $500 million of frozen Venezuelan money based on oil revenues, and guess where that cash is going? It's going into a Qatar bank account administered by the US president. You heard that right, not to the people of Venezuela or even the people of the US, but the president's own slush fund. Now, things have arced up further over Greenland, with Trump now threatening to apply 10% tariffs from the 1st of February on the UK, France, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands and Finland. And why has this happened? Well, because Europe has started deploying very small numbers of troops there. I mean, we're talking, 15, 20, that sort of thing. Why have they done this? Well, because Trump originally said that Greenland was defenseless against completely non-existent threats from Russia and China. Europeans have sent some people over there to presumably do a bit of scoping work to see what more they can do. And Trump then arcs up and claims it is the Europeans escalating the situation. And I see that our own Defence Minister Richard Marles is, as usual, refusing to comment on Trump's wish to grab Greenland, which is not only completely spineless, it's just plain wrong. No one in their right mind can support this idea because it would lead to the destruction of NATO and a lot more on top of that. Now, I'll quote Minister Marles directly. He says, NATO has played a very important role and continues to be very strong. I've been to the last 2 NATO meetings representing Australia, wow, and there is a definite sense of unity when you're at NATO meetings, so I feel confident about the future of NATO. This, let me say, is absolute nonsense. Marles, who would clearly make an excellent ambassador to Washington, embarrasses both himself and Australia with this obvious, transparent nonsense. No one in their right mind thinks NATO would survive a hostile US takeover of Greenland, and that's the only way it will happen. But Richard Marles is utterly terrified of saying anything that might cause the slightest offence to Trump and his minions. This is gobsmackingly awful stuff, and partly explains why the government is polling so badly at the moment. Australians want leadership, and this is definitely not it. Countries cannot just go around taking over others because they are militarily strong enough to do so, and Australia should be joining with European countries in saying that very politely but very clearly to the Trump administration. I struggle with this sort of political cowardice because it has the potential to do so much harm. Weakness doesn't work with Trump, as Mrs. Machado is finding out, having swapped her Nobel Peace Prize for a bag of trinkets. The Europeans made a huge strategic mistake months ago in not retaliating the first time Trump hit them with tariffs, because by not doing so, it just confirmed his view about how hopeless and weak they all are. Clearly, the successful decapitation of Venezuela's leadership and the kidnapping of the president has gone to Trump's head, which is incredibly dangerous for the world. That's the entire world, of which Australia is still a part. And by the way, one of the motivations for doing all of this could simply be to distract from the non-release of more of the Epstein files. And take it from me, Trump isn't going. Even if the midterm elections go ahead in November as scheduled, and the Republicans look like they will lose, he will simply order ICE and the National Guard in a few key states to seize all the voting machines alleging massive fraud. Before switching to domestic stuff, let me also say that Trump hasn't given up on the idea of turning Canada into the 51st state, not by a long shot. As the Europeans finally belatedly push back just a little bit on Greenland, Canada is once again starting to bubble up as another possibility for annexation. And this head in the sand stuff of Marles, Albo and Wong won't work. We might get lucky and not be directly threatened ourselves, but where will we stand if the US starts eyeing tiny Pacific nations, allies of Australia, and says it needs those for strategic reasons, and they will henceforth simply be part of the US? Also, see Trump has invited Prime Minister Albanese to join his so-called Board of Peace to sort out the future of Gaza before anyone gets excited about that or thinks it's evidence of a special relationship with the US. And just look at what the UK's special relationship is worth. And that's after they gave Trump not one but 2 state visits. This offer of joining the Board of Peace has been extended to dozens of countries. I smell a rat. Because of the few details available, there's a provision that if membership is to be extended beyond 3 years, a fee of US $1 billion will have to be paid. That's a nice round 1.5 billion Australian on today's exchange rates. What on earth is this about? Why pay anything? Is there a joining fee? And some people might say, look, Kim, we are already giving $4.5 billion to very profitable US submarine building companies. So what's wrong with an extra $1 billion to keep Trump happy? After all, he might be dead in 3 years' time. That's a valid point. But again, I wonder what other conditions there are in all of this. And as people start to contemplate how to rebuild Gaza as a gold-splattered Mar-a-Lago on the Mediterranean, where will all 2.2 million Palestinians go, particularly during the construction process? And I'm just waiting for some Americans to say, oh, look at Australia. You have lots of room and your country even looks a bit like Gaza. You take everyone while we figure out what we are doing. Now, the morality part. I think that you can attach some importance to being on the right side of history. When we look back at recent events, no one now seems to think that the invasion of Iraq was a good idea. Well, there are a few holdouts like John Howard, but most sensible people have come to the conclusion that that was wrong. Australia only had a very minor involvement in Libya, but that's turned out very badly as well. It's not only completely destabilised Libya, it's destabilised all of North Africa. Further back in time, Vietnam War, again, I don't think anyone will find that Australia's intervention involvement there was helpful for anyone. Of course, going back through history, you can find innumerable examples of countries that have backed the wrong horse. In the Second World War, the allies of Germany, like Italy, Hungary, Romania, and Finland, it didn't end up so well for them, even though Italy surrendered in 1943 and Romania and Finland actually switched sides and fought with the Soviet Union. Look, I'm not going to go on too much about this. It's such a broad, huge topic. But politicians of countries like Australia have to think hard about the possible consequences of their alliance decisions. And given the way that the United States is behaving, I think it is well and truly time for an honest, open, public assessment of the US relationship and what we want out of it. I think it's ridiculous that Australian politicians and most of the media are pretending it's all business as usual when it most definitely is not. Oh, a quick thing. I also noticed during the Christmas break, Canada donated $2.5 billion to Ukraine, Australia a pathetic $90 million, as Ukraine is fighting for its life, being bombarded daily by cruise missiles and drones. Right, now the promise bit. Let's have a look at the part about why it took the Prime Minister more than 3 weeks after the Bondi terrorist attack to agree to a royal commission when just about all of Australia was calling for one. It's fairly simple, and that is our Prime Minister, Albo, is obsessed with control and secrecy. And on top of that, he has a stubborn and self-righteous streak. Now, there's been this obsession with secrecy. Before the terror attack, it was there for all to see in the shape of the government's proposed overhaul of freedom of information legislation, which was very much driven by Albo and the Prime Minister's office. And the overhaul tried to make our freedom of information laws even less effective than they already are. And on top of that, he and his colleagues were lying, saying that the changes will increase transparency when they will not. Now, in my experience, the better politicians tend to have some sort of life experience before joining Parliament, but they are becoming very rare. So let's have a look at the current leadership team. Albo, party hack. Richard Marles, party hack. Penny Wong, party hack. And for people who are not very well grounded, it's easy for them to convince themselves that they are a genius. And for people who don't know that much about politics, allow me to explain that even as a humble backbencher, you are always in demand, and that's 7 days per week. Probably the most important person in the office runs the diary, and they sort through dozens of invitations every week. These flood in, and they are everything from school fetes to presenting prizes at sporting events to book launches to representing a minister. And at those events, the politicians are flattered and made to feel important. It's slightly less hectic for senators because they represent an entire state rather than a particular electorate. But certainly for larger parties, they make sure that senators also still have plenty to do in attending similar events, and especially if they are fundraisers. Now, the amount of ego massaging only increases with rank. When you are a minister, you are treated well, and once you are in cabinet, you and your staff and the department are telling you non-stop that you are a genius of unmatched abilities. And for people who are not especially sharp, and I put our Prime Minister in that category, I mean, yes, he's been to university and has a basic degree in economics, but he's not an original thinker. It's easy to really be swayed by this barrage of praise and flattery. Now, on top of that, he, Albo, has been brought up in the classic New South Wales Labor tradition that you never start an inquiry into anything if you cannot control the outcome, and you never start an inquiry that might give ammunition to the opposition. That's all there was to it. Incredible stubbornness coupled with a belief in his own infallibility, linked to a deeply held desire to suppress all information from the Australian public. And I'll just remind everyone, and especially the leadership of the ALP, you didn't win the last election. The opposition lost it. All opinion polls were showing a hung parliament until April the 2nd, when Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs. There was an immediate 2-point drop in support for the coalition, and in the Australian optional preferential voting system, that took Labor from a minority government to a record majority. But you will never hear that admitted by Albo or Marles or any of the others, because they prefer instead to think of themselves as unparalleled political geniuses. Now, right from the outset, I thought that a Royal Commission was warranted for several reasons, including, it was the largest terror attack that has taken place on Australian soil. 15 people lost their lives. And I also thought it was essential because this is such a huge, obvious security failing that we all deserve to know what is going on. I very much doubt that this year ASIO head Mike Burgess will be doing his self-congratulatory speech to a hand-picked audience of sycophants about how ASIO, how they were good, but ASIO were better. In this horrific case, clearly, they, the security services, were not. Now, the government immediately appointed Dennis Richardson to the task of conducting some sort of review. I know Dennis very well. He's one of Australia's most experienced bureaucrats. But I note that he seems to be being called out every time the government wants something reviewed in the security space. And I will say with respect and caution that what troubles me about this is that appointing Dennis Richardson gives the appearance, and I will emphasise appearance, of marking his own homework. He was the head of ASIO as well as Secretary of the Department of Defence and Ambassador to Washington and all of those sorts of things. I think that, an outsider would perhaps be, in this case, a better choice, because I would also expect, having some exposure to how he thinks, that a recommendation or recommendations will be along the lines of ASIO and the security services need even more legal power and their budgets need to be increased further. I'm not sure that that is the successful formula, and that's why I really welcome a Royal Commission, and I hope the Royal Commission does look very, very seriously at what appear to be some major failings in the intelligence side of things. And I'll use that to circle back to the fraught situation with the US and US behaviour, which everyone can see. Opinion polls are showing that while Australians continue to attach importance to the US alliance, people are wide awake to how the Trump administration is behaving, and they don't like it. And what Australia needs now is leadership when it comes to dealing with the US. We are not getting it, continuing to tell them that what they are doing is great, not pushing back on topics like Greenland is going to be counterproductive, but sadly I see no prospect at all of that changing in the short term. Goodbye for now. Hopefully there'll be some good news next time. Thank you for listening.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.